Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
I never thought my story would start with something like, "It was a beautiful day. The birds were singing, and I was literally enjoying the weather." But it didn't even begin with those words. There was no wonderful weather, no birds, and no other nonsense. It was pouring, overcast, and disgustingly damp. My sneakers were a complete swamp after walking on the wet pavement. So, it was understandable why my mood had sunk below zero. I already hated this damn city. It was raining, but Naruto didn't care. He never cared what the weather was like outside, even though rain always had unpleasant associations. Life was rather dull for Naruto. He'd spent nearly 6 years studying at the medical academy and was now considered a successful, promising cardiovascular surgeon. He also studied neurology, hoping to gain a second qualification. But he wasn't doing this out of vanity. Life was simply too boring for him. He was to blame for this himself, and he knew it perfectly well. But he had no desire to change anything. The loneliness he created didn't bother him in the least. He even loved it. No one could share his dorm room with him for long, as Naruto responded to everything with sullen silence, and when his roommate really annoyed him, the Uzumaki would literally burst into sarcasm. He insulted the unfortunate students, without the slightest concern for their feelings. No one knew what to do with him anymore, so for a whole year and a half no one bothered him. Naruto wasn't worried about any new roommates, though. He didn't care at all that there were bad rumors about him, both at the university and in the dorm. He didn't care what they thought of him. He wasn't going to live with them. But today was positively permeated with a sense of unease. Something hung in the air, a kind of tension. Naruto tried to ignore it, but he couldn't deny the premonition. It was the last days of summer, his senior year would soon begin, and he had to choose an internship. Naruto, of course, wasn't worried about the upcoming exams. He always excelled in all his subjects. Besides, all the teachers were proud of him, so he had a good reputation. It was unlikely they would want to fail him. Plans for the future, it seemed, could not be disrupted. Plans to spend this day peacefully studying yet another cardiac surgery manual were uninterrupted. That's what Naruto thought, yes, but apparently fate had decided not only to prevent it from coming true, but to downright hinder it. And no wonder, since fate had always been kind to Naruto, weeding out boring roommates, bestowing the affection of the teachers, and so on, even allowing him to perform several operations, thereby earning the trust and respect of the senior surgeons. And now she's decided to take it all out on him, probably. There was a gentle knock on the door, and then someone peered inside. Naruto didn't look up from his book, continuing to read about new heart surgery techniques. Probably someone had come in to ask something. But they were clearly in the wrong place. However, the unknown person's phrase made Naruto look up from his reading to stare at the guest in bewilderment. "Excuse me, is this room 405? "Yes, what do you need?" the blonde asked dryly. "I have to live here." The book almost fell out of Uzumaki's hands, but he held onto it and looked at the guest with indifference through his glasses. Interesting. He hadn't seen him before at the university. This man was clearly new here, otherwise he wouldn't have asked about the rooms. He glanced at the stranger's palm, which held a key with a bright yellow tag reading 405. No, he wasn't mistaken. Keys aren't given out for free. "Who are you?" Naruto finally asked. The brunette looked at him, raising an eyebrow. This guy clearly didn't stand on ceremony with new acquaintances, didn't respect guests. A misanthrope, really? Wow, the deans had really screwed him over. They'd said there was nowhere else to put him anyway. But he also noticed the way they exchanged glances. They were probably lying. "Achiha Sasuke," the brunette replied calmly, walking into the room and eyeing the bed next to his fair-haired roommate with interest. It didn't look as bad as he'd expected. He'd thought a firmer bed in the dorm was all he could get. And there was even a nightstand and a wardrobe. The neighbor glanced at him, then continued reading. Sasuke raised an eyebrow, his gaze catching on his black-rimmed glasses. It was strange, he read so much. Had his eyesight really deteriorated that much? And how convenient would it be to be a cardiac surgeon with poor eyesight? Always straining and all that, although Sasuke had heard his neighbor was unusual. "Would you like to introduce yourself?" Uchiha asked, sitting down on the bed. The mattress was perfectly fine. He could live with it. Although he still had a couple of years to live in this dorm until he finished his studies. He hadn't yet decided on an internship though. Sasuke himself had chosen to specialize in oncology, though he'd already regretted it a couple of times, as watching people die before his eyes was quite painful. "Uzumaki Naruto," the blonde responded lazily. "The nightmare of this dorm. I wonder how long you can last with me." He even looked up from his book to study Sasuke's reaction to such statements. However, instead of the expected surprise or fear, Naruto saw a kind of puppy-like delight in his roommate's dark eyes. "So you're that same Uzumaki Naruto?" Sasuke laughed. "That same one? We talked a lot about you at university. You were the one who saved a man with vodka and a penknife, right? Come on, you're right." Sasuke's excitement somehow seemed to be contagious to Naruto. However, he only chuckled and said calmly, "Yeah, it's me. A pleural puncture is one of the simplest surgeries I've ever performed. I've done a lot of surgeries in my life, so—" Naruto shrugged casually. Sasuke said nothing, studying the man across from him with interest. Naruto had rather soft features, rounded and pleasant to look at least when his face was relaxed. His blue eyes, beneath his glasses, were stern, yet at the same time, they glowed with indifference to everything around him. Naruto was currently reading some kind of manual, apparently about new methods in cardiology. "What's your specialty?" Naruto suddenly asked. Sasuke even flinched, not expecting this man to respond, especially given his warnings about his character. However, Sasuke didn't show surprise and replied, "I'm an oncologist. I still have a couple of years of school left, then I'll graduate." "What are you doing here?" Naruto asked indifferently, then added, explaining, "Why didn't you stay at home?" Sasuke remained silent. The story wasn't exactly pleasant. After a long illness, specifically leukemia, his mother died, and his father simply couldn't stay in a city where practically everything reminded him of her. Sasuke and his older brother, Itachi, were only too supportive of the idea, as the former had interned at the hospital where Mikoto was dying, and the latter worked there. The woman's doctor, in fact, was her husband. And Fugaku couldn't forgive himself for not saving the woman he loved, and for hurting his sons, too. At the new hospital, Fugaku and Itachi were welcomed with open arms. A talented surgeon like Itachi had been sought for a long time, and an experienced oncologist like Fugaku would also be welcome. Although the hospital staff were a little surprised by their request to transfer their youngest family member to the hospital's academy. After all, the institute in Sasuke's hometown was more prestigious. They agreed without hesitation. Sasuke didn't really care where he studied, but he didn't want to share his reasons with this indifferent boy. His reaction was clear enough. He was asking without any interest, just for the hell of it. Then again, it would have been strange for Naruto to ask something just for the hell of it. The Uchiha had already concluded that Naruto didn't care about those around him, so why was he asking? "Why am I even talking to him?" Naruto thought discontentedly. "I've never been interested in my roommates' lives, and now I'm asking why he's here and all that. And this isn't just banal politeness, it's just genuine interest." He frowned indignantly. "But I shouldn't let people in on me." Unnecessary connections lead to unnecessary pain. I don't want to feel any more pain. However, still, it wouldn't hurt to find out why he came here. I've heard about the Uchiha. They came here from the heart of the land of fire. Was Akasuna Gakure really worth our Konoha? Akasuna, damn it, is much more prestigious, even though she was practically nothing before. I need to find out what brought him here. I asked a question. Naruto's voice was chillingly cold, almost metallic. Sasuke winced, but decided to remain evasive. Mom was seriously ill. Then, she died. We couldn't stay in Akasuna. I don't want to talk about it. Running away from your own memories. A mocking voice distracted Sasuke from his thoughts. Only weaklings do that. If you had even a little strength, you could have stayed there and continued living. Sasuke gave him a hateful look. He'd been calm at first, at least when he'd come in here, even looking for a peaceful conversation. He could have easily befriended his neighbor, but only idiots run from themselves. Naruto continued in a calm, metallic voice, practically devoid of emotion. Smart people stay where their loved ones once were and cherish their memories. They don't run from them, but guard what they left behind. You're a weakling, Uchiha, but I thought otherwise when I saw you. Naruto stated calmly, putting his book down and ignoring his neighbor's murderous glare. You couldn't find the strength to preserve your memories. You ran away from them. Shut up. Sasuke barked. What did he understand about this? Had he ever felt the pain Sasuke felt in his heart those days? What did he know? You're so angry because I'm right, he stated with a satisfied smile. I've touched something painful in you, so you're snarling at me, and trying to kill me with your eyes. But you won't succeed. You're weak. Weaker than me. Uzumaki nodded proudly. Sasuke jumped out of bed and slammed his fist right into the blonde's smiling lips. Naruto expected the blow, but was instead pressed against the wall. It didn't hurt, not much, so the Uzumaki laughed heartily. Sasuke repeated the blow, only this time it caught him on the chin, and Naruto lifted his head, revealing his neck, which, like his cheeks, was adorned with several scars. However, there were 3 on each of his cheeks, while on his neck, there were too many to count. Naruto stopped laughing and pushed Sasuke off the bed. He lowered his head and pulled the collar of his light sweater over his orange t-shirt so that his neck was hidden again, covered. Boring, he said calmly, once again immersed in reading the latest methods. Bitch, Sasuke muttered and left the room, slamming the door loudly. It was at this moment that Uchiha Sasuke began to hate Uzumaki Naruto. It won't last long. The object of hatred thought contentedly. What the hell is this idiot even thinking about? Sasuke thought angrily, kicking a pebble that had strayed under his foot. How dare he speak of me like that, based solely on first impressions? Although, what the hell kind of first impression could there be if we only exchanged a few words and glanced at each other? Uchiha kicked another stone that crossed his path, and at that moment a hand fell on his shoulder. He was about to turn around and offer a few angrily affectionate words to the disturber of his peace, but the intruder had made himself known first. Why are you taking out your anger on unfortunate objects of nature? Sasuke looked up, already intrigued by this philosopher. Before him stood a tall, pale man with red hair and a tattoo of love on his forehead. His green eyes were heavily lined with black eyeliner, giving him a rather odd appearance. His green eyes were searching, a spark of interest burning in them. This is a bad day, Sasuke muttered, hoping that would be the end of the conversation. However, the brown-haired man apparently decided to at least get through to someone, otherwise his day would be a disaster. So what happened to you? He asked with a grin. What could have ruined your day? What does it matter to you? Uchiha sighed. Apparently, getting rid of this guy wouldn't be that easy. The annoying stranger sat down on the bench, gesturing for the brunette to sit next to him. He complied with a dejected expression and stared at the brown-haired man, waiting for an explanation. He didn't quite like this guy. His appearance was rather unpleasant. Unlike Naruto, whose appearance made him intrigued. However, as Sasuke had just discovered, looks could be deceiving. If the cute Naruto was such a jerk, why couldn't this repulsive-looking guy be pleasant company? Without realizing it, Sasuke slowly but surely began to calm down. Look here. He pointed a thin finger at the first woman he saw. Her day could be made miserable, say, because you could come up to her and tell her she's fat. And then she'll come home tonight and tell her mom that you ruined her day. When her mom asks her why, she'll tell her this reason. Or, the guy pointed at a man, seemingly successful and dressed in a business suit. You could go up to him and tell him his business is ruined. Of course, that's not the same reason I suggested for the woman, but what I wanted to say is that everyone has their own reason for having the worst day ever. And I'm curious, what was your reason? Sasuke drawled. Yeah, that sounds about right. This guy's a psychologist or something? Interested in motivations and stuff. I literally moved to the city today, and I had to move into a dorm right away. Since I'm starting school soon, I'm studying to be a doctor. Unsuspectingly, I went to the room they assigned me, and there I found the worst roommate they could have given me. Sarcastic, spewing malice and insults at every turn. He has no respect for other people's feelings, doesn't care about them. He speaks without even thinking. He irritates me with every word, even a sigh. He irritates me with every movement. I've never hated anyone, but I think this feeling I'm experiencing right now, I think it's hatred. I see, the boy drawled. By the way, my name is Gaara, and today I'm not having a good day either. I'm Sasuke, the Uchiha said. So what's wrong with you today? He asked, more out of politeness. Gaara chuckled. He couldn't quite pinpoint why he'd chosen this guy. He could have approached anyone in the park, but for some reason, he felt drawn to him. Ruffling his red hair, the guy looked up at the sky and said, "You're just asking out of politeness," Gaara stated. "Oh well, I don't care. I just wanted to vent to someone. My problem isn't as serious as it might seem. Like many in this world, I have a loved one. Or rather, I have one. Had one. I'm a creative person, and my favorite thing is photography. I can say without exaggeration that I'm an excellent photographer, and it brings me quite a bit of money. You know, creative people often demand a lot of attention. I wanted it too, but not in the way you might think. For me, it didn't consist of adoring fans. For me, being happy meant having someone by my side who understood my passion and also paid a lot of attention to me. Not all of it, of course, but a lot. Someone who would help me cope with my melancholy and in sad moments would simply hug me or hold my hand. In exchange, I would give them myself and my creativity. I had such a person too. His name was Sai, and back then, I thought there couldn't be anyone closer. But people are prone to mistakes, otherwise you're hardly human. So I was repeating everything my ancestors had done, getting burned time and time again. Sai didn't need me, he needed my creations. Once, I was preparing for a very large exhibition. I needed to take a lot of photographs, and I took several dozen, a wide variety, both portraits and landscapes. Naturally, I didn't show them to anyone except him. It turns out, I was wrong to trust him so much. One night, he left. And not alone, but with my work. And within a couple of days, everyone knew my photos were just pathetic plagiarisms of his. That time, my work was practically perfect, better than the old ones, so they trusted him unconditionally. I could have res-hot everything, no problem, but I was already disgraced. Not a single agency accepts my work. As a result, I was left without a job. My parents are now paying for my education. They constantly shame me. You probably already realized that I'm a psychologist. The subtle matter of the mind has always interested me. You could say it was second only to photography. I wouldn't say I'm unhappy. I still take pictures, but those in the know look at me with disdain. They still think I'm a pathetic amateur who only knows how to steal other people's work. Even if I show them the fruits of my labor immediately after the photo, they will only snort and say that the work is rubbish. Yes, you'll probably say, are the opinions of strangers really that important to me? And I'll tell you yes. I've always relied on them. My work has changed depending on people's feedback. I'm too dependent on them. Sasuke sighed and looked at his interlocutor differently. They say everyone has their own story of pain. Sasuke had his, Gaara had his. It was never worth comparing one person's story with another, because everyone is different. What would never upset one person might kill another. Naruto probably had a similar story. Something that made him so angry and distant, making himself look like a heartless jerk. It was unlikely he was like this to begin with, as his eyes seemed to hold something from his past. Sasuke suddenly forgot his anger and resentment towards his roommate, instead filling his heart with an unusual pity and a desire to help, to draw the darkness out of Naruto's heart. But did Naruto really need his help? The answer was obvious. He was too proud, he'd refuse, and send him packing. However, that was unlikely to stop Sasuke. He was already inspired by his new goal. For some reason, he craved the sight of Naruto laughing sincerely, of genuine, unadulterated joy lighting up his eyes. He wanted to see him happy. For some reason, this desire, along with the bright feelings, also evoked sadness. Yes, he wanted to achieve this, but could he? Would he be able to pull someone who was themselves rejoicing in what was happening in their soul? After all, such things cannot be accomplished without mutual desire. You know, Gaara, the Uchiha said slowly, if I were you, I'd kill that Sai. I'd beat him for a long time until he realized how much he hurt. I once wanted to kill him. Slowly and methodically, relishing his pain screams. But that desire has passed. Time has probably killed him. The boy shrugged. Yes, it's a shame. Yes, it's unpleasant, but it will remain on his conscience. Sasuke nodded. There was some truth in these conclusions. In any case, Gaara's desire to leave things as they were was surprising. Sasuke would have exacted revenge, long and mercilessly, waiting at every corner and giving him no peace. He would have humiliated his new lovers, using any means available. This only confirmed that they were completely different people. But why should this immediately mean that they won't be able to become friends? Listen, Gaara, what do you think? If an idiot drives himself into a cage of darkness, can he be pulled out of there? Gaara just chuckled. Naruto put the manual down and, taking off his glasses, rubbed his eyes tiredly. He hadn't learned anything new. They'd covered all these new directions at the end of the year. However, this manual was a year old, so it wasn't surprising that he'd merely refreshed his old knowledge. Sighing, the boy sat up in bed and looked out the window. The clouds parted, revealing a patch of blue sky, and even the sun decided to shine its rays directly into his eyes. Naruto snorted and shook his head in displeasure. Lately, he had been immersed in his studies, as they were a great distraction from everyday life and the annoying classmates who, with enviable regularity, tried to find out the reasons for Naruto's reclusion. Uzumaki responded to all their attempts with silence. It was difficult to get a proper response from him, because these people held no interest for him. They were all the same, predictable. He could tell what would interest them next. They always had a new hobby, be it a classic book or a particular movie. Naruto could predict the interests of these parodies of humanity down to the minute. And this Sasuke, was he also gray? Or was he like the one Uzumaki had always longed for? Naruto felt a strange urge to start a conversation, to talk for hours. He could only converse with his father, and even then, for no more than half an hour. Social pressure weighed on him, while isolation was bliss. Did Naruto want to get out of this? Did he want to escape the darkness of loneliness? Maybe he did want to. But he didn't know how to ask for help. "This is what death looks like," the man says. "Do you like it?" The boy stares in horror at the woman's open body. Her torn stomach reveals her entrails, a foul color, so disgusting. "Look, idiot, these are the intestines," he said, pulling out the seemingly endless organ with a knife. "And this is what a person smells like when they can't hide their waste," he said, laughing. "Look into her eyes, they're already glassy. My actions don't hurt her anymore." The knife passes across the chest, making a neat cut. "Look, slut, that's her heart. It's barely beating anymore because she's almost dead," he said, poking his finger at the weakly twitching heart. Then the man indifferently plunges the knife into it with all his might. An unpleasant sound is heard, and the guy presses himself against the wall. "Look, those are her lungs," he said, carefully poking one of the vesicles on the organ. "She doesn't need them anymore. That's what death looks like. Is that what you want, you little idiot? Do you want to save other hens like her? Look, her heart and lungs were killed by cigarettes. Is that what you want? To save their indifferent hearts? You're a crazy moron." Naruto had isolated himself from society. This isolation suited him perfectly, so when someone tried to tear him apart, he'd lash out with venomous words, mocking them, and literally spewing sarcasm at every turn. He didn't want anyone from the outside to enter his cozy world, to pester him and pry into his soul with their intrusive questions. It wasn't their business, it was his choice. He'd never been as interested in people as they were in him. He didn't care why they acted the way they did, why they cried, why they fought. He didn't care. They were just annoying flies. Friends were temporary. They'd disappear after a while. Some lasted longer, some didn't last at all. He didn't need people like that. This attraction to other people was unusual for him. He'd only ever reached out to his mother or father, but that was par for the course. They were his parents, after all. They'd be there forever, for sure. And then there was Sasuke. A strange guy. Naruto couldn't look at him for long. It was as if Sasuke were the sun, impossible to look at without going blind. Something about him was so different from Naruto, and it irritated him. Different people don't get along. Successful operations, recognition from the best surgeons, all of this was meaningless to him. He wasn't vain, didn't chase success, but recommendations were important, especially in his profession. So he collected them with the meticulous care of a discerning collector. He carefully selected which surgeons were worth listening to and which were not. When he performed surgeries, he was cold and indifferent. Patients were like simple tasks for him. The only important thing was to monitor various indicators, otherwise the task would be failed. All the students knew about this attitude of his, so they were surprised. Why did Naruto decide to become a doctor? After all, people were essentially just a hindrance to him. And yet, he took on the task of saving them, saving one of their most important organs. Naruto had his reasons, but he had no intention of introducing them to his classmates. These people were just looking for someone to pick on between classes, especially the girls. He was particularly annoyed by Sakura Haruno, the girl with dyed pink hair and green eyes. And her friend, Ino Yamanaka, was equally infuriating. She wore contacts, but boasted about the incredible color of her eyes. These hens had repeatedly tried to sniff out something about him, but Naruto was good at keeping his secrets from strangers. He wasn't looking forward to the new school year. He was looking forward to its end. He'd finally be able to graduate from the academy. True, he'd still have an internship to do, but that was more interesting. The abundance of medical practice in hospitals was much more enjoyable for him than practicing, medically, on mannequins. Of course, they sometimes entrusted them with people, otherwise Naruto wouldn't have performed operations, but it was so rare that his hands didn't even have time to get used to the scalpel. Every time Uzumaki picked it up, it was like the first. Their advisor, Kakashi-sensei, was such a bore it was sickening. Not only was he late for class, but he was always reading anti-medical books. Most often, it was from the Come, Come, Paradise series. Some of the students read these books too, but Naruto was indifferent to them. He had never loved anyone the way couples love, for example, but that didn't bother him. Love was just unnecessary affection, which he didn't need at all. Of course, his body wasn't indifferent, and sometimes it demanded release. Most often, Naruto resorted to using his hands, but sometimes he hired prostitutes from a rather reputable company. To him, the girls were all just faceless dolls, helping him relieve tension. He didn't feel any of the attraction to them that many books describe. It was all just empty words to him. Naruto sighed heavily, and rubbed his forehead. Life wasn't unusual for him. It didn't interest him the way it did many people his age. Anyone who knew Uzumaki would say he didn't care, but that wasn't true. Naruto had built his image as an indifferent bastard long and hard, and he'd succeeded. But sometimes he craved a little spark of interest. He wanted to paint life in bright, interesting colors. You'll never surpass him. You'll always be just your brother's shadow, but certainly no better than him. No matter how hard you try, all your efforts will be in vain. The boy looks at the man with resentment. He understands he's broken, but still, could that really be the reason for the yelling and hurtful words? He shouldn't take it out on everyone. It's not their fault that their mother is gone. And yet he's always yelling at him, at Itachi, at his friends, at his co-workers. For now, everyone's putting up with it, because it's only been a week, but it won't last forever. Sasuke remains silent, waiting for further words that will touch him deep within. He will not show emotion, hiding it from his father behind a mask of indifference. Perhaps he himself is to blame for Fugaku's hatred for him. No matter what happened in their lives, Sasuke's face was emotionless. His dying mother never saw him smile. She saw only a cold, indifferent face. He loved her, perhaps more than anyone else in this family, but he didn't show it. For some reason, feelings were alien to him within his family. Among friends, yes, but within his family, no. His father hated this quality in his son. Itachi was superior to him in everything. He was more successful in his studies, more respected by his colleagues, more well-read and intelligent. Moreover, his eldest son's face was never masked, which Fugaku considered the height of magnificence. Unlike many respected men, the man valued the absence of masks. He valued the truth and strictly discouraged lies. Therefore, Fugaku was ashamed of his younger son. It was as if he were harboring a snake in his bosom. A snake that contradicted all his father's principles, displaying indifference. "Listen, father, I know you find me disgusting, unlike my brother," he said calmly, watching Fugaku frantically reach for his cigarettes. How ironic. "But you don't have to remind me of that on a regular basis. We'll be moving soon, and I'll be living separately from you, so you won't have to see me. But you know, Dad, the worst thing is the way you treat me. I'm not a stranger to you, and yet you're dear to me. And I feel so disgusted and repulsed by the way you always show your hatred towards me. You're trying to squeeze the emotions out of me like that. I can see it right there on your face. But all you manage to do is make me feel disgusted. Stop doing that. After all, I still feel pain." Fugaku couldn't respond to this. He only watched his son close the door behind him. Leaving his office. Did his son despise him? Or did he? The man took a drag on his cigarette and wiped the sweat from his brow with a trembling hand. His younger son was a mystery to him. He'd always loved his older son more than his older brother, who only brought him joy and always smiled. But suddenly, Fugaku wondered, what if his older son's smile was just a mask? What if he'd been unfair to Sasuke? Suddenly, the rain, so disgusting. The streets are flooded with water, but for some reason it turns red. The color of her hair, the color of her love, the color of her blood. He runs along the wet asphalt, catching the nauseating scent of blood. He'd smelled that aroma so many times during surgeries, but he didn't resist. It was just an attribute, a side effect of his beloved work. And now his insides twisted into a knot, his stomach almost turned inside out, and he felt a dull urge to run. He turned into some alley, and caught a flash of red. Her hair, it was her hair. "Mom!" he screams convulsively. He can't hold back the tears. They flowed down his cheeks, where fresh, deep cuts remain, burning with pain. "Mom!" he repeats, rushing after her. "What, you bastard, are you scared?" A familiar voice laughs. The boy shakes his head. Not this dream, not this one, which comes once a month reliably. Not this one, which has become more frequent in recent weeks. Not this one. The man kicks something, and the boy looks down in horror. Red is the color of her hair, the color of her love, the color of her. A scream escapes his throat. Naruto's eyes fly open, and he sits up abruptly in bed, meeting the surprised gaze of his roommate as he returns. The dark eyes look puzzled at first, but then they notice echoes of madness in the others. Sasuke jumps up to Uzumaki's bed and looks at his face with concern. Naruto? What happened? When Sasuke entered the room, Naruto found him asleep. His roommate's face twitched occasionally, expressing concern, but the Uchiha wasn't alarmed. Who knows what the blonde might be dreaming about? He calmly began unpacking his things, placing some of his notebooks and textbooks on the table in his half of the room. He managed to review a couple of forgotten notes and, out of boredom, began solving chemistry problems when a sudden, convulsive scream interrupted him. Sasuke turned around abruptly, startled. At first, he thought one of his dorm mates was just playing a prank on them, but then it occurred to him that Naruto was the only one who could pull such a prank. His gaze fell on his roommate's bunk, and immediately, seeing Naruto, Sasuke jumped up and ran toward him. There was something strange in his clouded blue eyes, something mad, something completely abnormal. Naruto? What happened? Sasuke was genuinely afraid for his roommate, and when tears suddenly glistened in his eyes, the Uchiha became even more frightened. Naruto must have had a nightmare, but what could this boy have dreamed of to provoke such a reaction? Naruto exhaled through his teeth and glared at Sasuke. However, he saw genuine concern in his eyes, which didn't stop him too much. "Fuck you, Sasuke," he hissed. The Uchiha frowned, even at a moment like this, ready to burst into tears. So lost and silently begging for care, Naruto remained the same man, embittered at the whole world. What could break you so much that you become like this? Anyway, don't rush into it. Naruto's anger suddenly gave way to mercy. Give me some cigarettes. The Uchiha glanced at the nightstand and saw a pack of cigarettes lying forlornly. Taking it, he silently handed it to his neighbor and went to his desk. Strange, Naruto was a doctor too. He knew perfectly well the dangers of smoking, and yet he still had such a bad habit. Sighing, Sasuke concentrated on one of the tasks, but his thoughts were sluggish. Naruto struck a lighter and, putting a cigarette between his lips, lit it. The window was slightly open, so the smoke would quickly dissipate. He exhaled the blue smoke toward the ceiling, watching it disappear. Sometimes he, too, wanted to disappear like that, to dissolve. He didn't smoke often. No, smoking wasn't a regular habit. But every time he woke up screaming after this nightmare, he reached for the pack lying on the nightstand. Sighing heavily, Uzumaki stubbed out his cigarette on the wall, which already had several similar stains, and tossed it out the window. He noticed Sasuke involuntarily covering his nose with his hand and chuckled. What? Are you afraid of suffering from passive smoking? I don't react well to cigarette smoke, they answered hoarsely, then sighed heavily. Sasuke wasn't lying. He choked on the smoke, always running from the room where his father smoked. Once, Fugaku, not believing his son's reaction to smoking, made him stand and watch while he smoked one cigarette after another, 3 in total, and then the head of the family had to call an ambulance for his son. Naruto also doubted the veracity of Sasuke's words, but he noticed how pale he became, though it seemed he couldn't get any paler. For some reason, he immediately thought he wouldn't smoke in front of the Uchiha again, unless, of course, the nightmare caught him in his neighbor's presence again. Sasuke was a strange man. He had a strange effect on Naruto, and it frightened and repelled him. Naruto sighed and stood up, peering over Sasuke's shoulder. He was stuck on a chemistry problem, and Uzumaki decided to study the problem to help. The best at everything, he undoubtedly knew practically everything a medical student should know about chemistry. What's stuck? Naruto asked sympathetically. Sasuke was even surprised by the emotion flashing in his neighbor's voice, but he shrugged, unwilling to admit he'd given in. He really was stuck, unsure what to do with the equation. Raising his head, The Uchiha noticed the intent gaze of blue eyes. Naruto glanced over Sasuke's handwriting. Then, suddenly, a finger poked at the very first line, and Uzumaki calmly, without emotion, noted one fact that made Sasuke want to bite himself in the ass. Such mistakes were so typical of him. You have an error in the coefficient here. It should be a 3, but as you can see, you have a 2. Correct it, and everything will be okay. Sasuke double-checked, and it turned out Naruto was right. Sighing with dissatisfaction, the boy scrapped all his efforts and started over. Some might have found this odd, since it only required a couple of numbers to be corrected, but Sasuke had a habit of rewriting the entire problem whenever he noticed a mistake, approaching it from a slightly different angle. Naruto didn't know this, so he asked, "And why are you correcting half a page of the solution when the coefficient only affected the last couple of actions?" "Because I have different numbers now. I need to tune into a different wavelength, rewrite everything from scratch. I always do this." Sasuke quickly wrote down the first steps, which turned out to be simple for him, and then, plugging in the coefficients in the right places, he finally found the formula for the substance. What irritated him most was that the solution sometimes stretched out over a page, while the substance came out simple, something like methane. "You need to break that habit," the blonde chuckled. "I don't know in what profession it would be practical, but certainly not in ours. If you misspell something in a diagnosis, what, are you going to have to rewrite the chart? By the time the patient gets there, they'll be dead sooner. Especially considering the specialty you've chosen for yourself." Sasuke shrugged. It was certainly not the best habit, but it had been ingrained since school. The teachers didn't like it either. Although the biology teacher had been very encouraging of Sasuke's practice with extended answers, he was more of an exception. Naruto sat on his bed and thoughtfully watched his fellow student. He pretended not to notice, but his back was tense. Why was he watching him? Hadn't he seen people writing? However, forcing him to look away would be an admission of weakness. Itachi was collected and calm, despite the situation being quite nerve-wracking. Sasuke jumped out of the car and looked fearfully at the man they'd hit. He was clearly not much older than Sasuke. The Uchiha himself had recently turned 18. Everything they'd learned about first aid at the institute instantly vanished from his mind. Itachi glanced at the man, then placed 2 fingers on his neck. Sasuke was afraid to breathe when a wrinkle appeared between his brother's brows. Looking at the younger man, Itachi calmly beckoned him closer and said, "Cardiac arrest. Now I'm going to perform cardiac massage, and you'll perform artificial respiration. And stop shaking, otherwise you'll be a lousy doctor." Sasuke nodded fearfully. Itachi performed a few typical chest compressions, then nodded for Sasuke to follow suit. The brunette pressed his lips to the victim's open mouth and exhaled, causing the other's chest to rise. After repeating this several times, Itachi checked his pulse again. This time, Sasuke judged his expression to be satisfied. Indeed, a minute later, his brother said, "Alive. Now all we have to do is wait for the team to arrive." Sasuke envied his brother at that moment. So calm and collected in a moment of danger, he'd been able to help someone, literally save their life. The boy never reported them, firstly because he was grateful to Itachi, and secondly, he was partly to blame for the accident. He'd driven his motorcycle into oncoming traffic. He'd been rushing to the hospital to see his wife, barely paying attention to the road. His brother was perfect in every way. Sasuke, though he loved him, sometimes simply hated him, looking into Itachi's calm and somewhat arrogant face, hating him, looking into his impenetrable eyes. Although Fugaku said his eldest son didn't hide his emotions, Itachi carefully controlled them. In front of his father, he acted free and uninhibited, while Sasuke, on the contrary, withdrew into himself. Sasuke hated his brother even more that day, simply because Itachi had done everything right, while Sasuke sat there in fear. Simply because Itachi had gotten all the credit, even though Sasuke hadn't deserved it. Sasuke set out to improve. But things weren't going well. Schoolwork was difficult, and he had to ask his brother for help. Sasuke hated himself for it. However, his brother didn't think of himself as superior, helping Otuto with homework or other assignments. He didn't think Sasuke was stupid, helping naturally like a brother. He had no idea what Sasuke was feeling, because he always kept a calm expression on his face, discreetly thanked him for his help, and went to his room. Itachi had no idea how his brother felt about him, just as he had no idea that Sasuke had gone into medicine to improve himself somehow. Sasuke was an excellent student, considered the smartest in his class, but compared to Itachi, Sasuke was nothing. Suddenly, he wanted to introduce his brother to Naruto. What if Uzumaki was also stupid if you compare them? Then Sasuke would at least calm down a little. But contact with Naruto hadn't yet been established. They barely exchanged a few normal words before Naruto fell silent for a long time. Uzumaki seemed to be forever self-absorbed, uninterested in anyone's attention. In fact, that was true. Naruto had simply donned a shell of indifference. Sasuke wouldn't have cared less under any other circumstances, but Naruto didn't seem like the type to hate everyone without a reason. He needed reasons. Sasuke wanted to find them. The rain poured down mercilessly. A fair-haired boy ran along the sidewalk, shielding himself with a folder he held above his head. It didn't matter that there were important lectures. He already knew them. He was running to meet the girl he'd loved for so long. Sayuri was beautiful and had a wonderful personality. She was also sociable, like him, so they were never bored. He'd endured many blows of fate, but she became a ray of light that hid all the bad. He was drawn to her without realizing it, and he was unlikely to let her go. The meeting was scheduled near her institute. The girl was studying philology, a useless major in Naruto's opinion, but Sayuri explained that she would later become an English teacher. Uzumaki found it hard to believe such a major was necessary at school, but he didn't object. He didn't want to get into the details. The young doctor was a little tired. But today was Saturday. He loved Saturdays because they were followed by Sundays. Either sleep in or let loose. Today, he preferred to spend the evening with Sayuri, maybe even the night. And it would combine both fun and relaxation. However, Naruto's plans were destined to fail. Approaching the institute, he saw his beloved kissing a red-haired girl. His vision darkened with anger. It seemed that this redhead was the one Sayuri had imagined as her best friend. Is that what their friendship was like? He rushed toward them, threw beautifully wrapped flowers in his now ex-girlfriend's face, and ran away. Fate had dealt him another blow, which reawakened his desire to die. Naruto could barely resist it, for the darkness engulfed his soul much faster than light. He ran to the apartment he was renting at the time, then locked himself in and screamed loudly. Fate was unfair and cruel. As Naruto pulled the blade from his razor, he thought angrily about how much he hated them all, gays and lesbians, for not even considering that it was wrong and unsightly. He would never dare get into a relationship with a guy. It was so disgusting and unnatural. Running the cold steel over his wrists, Naruto triumphantly thought that now this bitch would understand who she'd lost. But fate had other plans, preventing Uzumaki's plans from coming to fruition. A neighbor noticed the open door and, running into the apartment, managed to save the bleeding student. After that, Naruto was forbidden to live alone and was moved to a dorm. Fate dealt him many painful blows. He endured them to a certain extent. Now, looking at the scars on his wrists, the boy remembered how much he hated them. He remembered it even when he looked at the calendar. And he hissed through his teeth, "I hate Saturdays!" Who has ever found life easy on this planet? Even the rich don't have it easy, because money doesn't solve everything. Money can't buy true love. Money can't always ward off a fatal illness. Money can't resurrect the dead. Money can't rid you of the pain in your soul, because money is just pieces of paper. Money isn't a person who can help you come to your senses. Fudaku Uchiha tried to drown his sorrows in alcohol, tried to pick up girls in brothels, but he still dreamed of Mikoto. Fugaku Uchiha tried to do anything, but he only managed to leave the city where everything reminded him of his ex-wife. His sons followed him. They were loyal to their father, and could not leave him alone with his grief and pain. Morning greeted Sasuke with a bucket of cold water. Dumbfounded, the Uchiha jumped out of bed to see his roommate grinning above him. Naruto was holding an iron bucket, which he slammed down on the floor. While the Uchiha was trying to figure out how to tell Naruto to go to hell during these last days of summer, when he was trying to catch up on sleep, Uzumaki declared, "Well, Sasuke-chan, good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Naruto-chan?" the Uchiha retorted sarcastically, rising from the bed. Uzumaki watched calmly, unafraid of his neighbor's enraged expression. After all, that was precisely the reaction he was looking for. Sasuke sighed and raised his fist, hoping to give the brat a good whack, but the brat was faster, grabbing his fist and smirking. "It won't work like yesterday. I didn't mean to kick your ass then, but now..." Naruto pointedly ran his fingers along his belt, wanting to unbuckle it. Sasuke immediately came up with a plan. "Are Naruto's pants big?" "That means..." As soon as the blonde removed his belt and slapped it against his hand a couple of times, Sasuke suddenly tugged at his pants, causing them to slide down, revealing orange briefs with a black spiral. Naruto slowly contemplated this beauty, then looked up at his roommate. A battle of gazes began, though Naruto was at a disadvantage to the Uchiha. He felt humiliated by being in his underwear, even with a menacing belt in his hand. Sasuke's glasses were slightly disconcerted by his Fananduk pajamas, but he looked more menacing. "What a bitch," Naruto said calmly, pulling up his pants and returning his belt to its original place. "Well, that's 1-0 in your favor, Sasuke-chan." Haha, the previous neighbors were already starting to freak out after that inspection. "Because I wouldn't let anyone leave me without pants. However, you, brave. I like boys like that." Naruto smacked his lips, and the Uchiha shuddered. "Don't be shy, Sasuke-chan. I'm not a faggot." "Okay, I'm going." And Naruto quickly left the room. Outside the door, Uzumaki slammed his hatred into the wall. The damn Uchiha didn't even flinch at the obvious attempt to spank him. No, Naruto wouldn't have done that, but still. What's more, the resourceful bastard even found a way to get revenge on him. Damn Avenger. Sighing, the boy headed down the stairs. He had no particular route, but he liked wandering around the city. It calmed his feverish head, though if he passed through places associated with something unpleasant, he would immediately get angry. Right now, Naruto wanted to go to the river, to the embankment. As he knew, it was uncrowded at this time of day, so he wouldn't have any problems hating people. The cigarettes helped me forget. School started tomorrow, so Sasuke's irritation would subside. True, the first day was never anything special, just a superficial review of what had been covered, and the authors and titles of the manuals on the board. Naruto never wrote them down. The teachers recommended the most crap. He only read contemporary literature. Who did he like, and who didn't he like at the academy? Perhaps the most vile person among the motley crew of professors was Yakushi Kabuto. Young, no older than 30, he had a sadistic streak and had been spotted more than once near the BDSM club. Naruto didn't care about the professor's tastes, but he was a terrible teacher. God knows how he got here as a teacher, but all his advice on first aid ended with the idea of simply leaving the person and walking away. Like, why bother with unnecessary problems? Naruto disagreed. Yes, he was indifferent to people, but he was still a doctor. Doctors are supposed to help, not run from the dying. Help! Naruto looked up from his ramen and looked around. He was sitting outside the cozy Ichiraku Cafe, so the cry for help was a bit irritating. He was just trying to enjoy the divine noodles when the unknown woman started calling out for someone in a dying voice. Help! Is there a doctor here? The poor woman screamed, while everyone ignored her. Sighing, Naruto put down his cutlery and walked over to the girl lying on the pavement, the screaming woman standing next to her. What happened? The guy asked, dryly and matter-of-factly. The woman couldn't say anything, just stared blankly at him, blinking. What a wonderful medical history. The guy squatted down next to her and placed 2 fingers on her neck. There was no pulse, no breathing. What preceded this incident? Naruto barked, slapping the woman on the cheek. She immediately came to her senses and began babbling. She hit herself really hard at school. She was pushed. She ran into something. It seems like a wall. Naruto nodded to himself. Pneumothorax. Luckily, the guy always carried syringes with him. Actually, that wasn't exactly why he carried them. How long has he been holding his breath? A minute, maybe 2. Uzumaki darted to his table, snatching a knife from it and running it across his finger to test it. Sharp. Grabbing a bottle of vodka from a man nearby, he doused his amateur instrument with it and rushed back. Quickly helping the girl sit up, he ordered the woman to support her in a sitting position while he unbuttoned her blouse. The beauty of her body, or lack thereof, didn't bother Naruto. He wasn't human, not a boy. He was a doctor. Counting to the 7th rib, the boy made a decisive incision, and then, before the shocked woman's eyes, he sucked the excess air out of the girl's lungs. Actually, the diagnosis was desperate and overconfident. The cause of the symptoms simply coincided. Looking at the liquid in the syringe, Naruto frowned. Bad color. The girl suddenly took a convulsive breath and started coughing, while Uzumaki called an ambulance. The incision needed stitches. Get checked. I strongly advise you, Naruto said, standing up and handing the woman a syringe. Give it to the doctors so they can test her. And moving away from the frightened woman, the guy returned to his cold ramen, regretting that his favorite food had gone cold. He'd never been proud of saving anyone there. That was his job, and that was why he'd studied at the academy. However, a twinge of pride still struck Uzumaki's heart, as he'd saved a man not in a perfectly clean operating room, but in what was essentially a field setting. He'd reacted promptly and done everything correctly. So who did he like at this academy? Naruto didn't particularly like anyone, but there were some he disliked less than others. One such person was Irika-sensei, who taught biological chemistry and had also taught parasitology at one point. He was young, just like Kabuto, but Yumino was younger than Yakushi. He was, as Naruto knew, 27. Being such a successful professor at his age was quite commendable. In their very first parasitology lesson, Irika informed them that doctors should put squeamishness to the side. They would encounter things far beyond the scope of the medical profession, such as roundworm. They would encounter bullet and knife wounds, crushed skulls and broken heads, brains on the wall, and blood in the bathroom. He advised the squeamish to get their documents from the dean's office and simply transfer while they had time. Naruto couldn't agree that worms were the easiest part of being a doctor. Or rather, not even easy, just not that disgusting. He'd seen so many bastards who loved delicate human organs that even his strong stomach sometimes cramped. Luckily, he didn't eat before such classes. But the girl who really infuriated him, his classmate Sakura, once exposed her breakfast to everyone when she saw a section of intestine with a parasite inside. Naruto didn't entirely despise her for it. There were other reasons, and he himself turned green from the sight, but still, why did he have to eat so much? Sakura noticed this guy during her first class on the first day of school. He had blonde hair, a beautiful natural color, the likes of which she'd never seen before, blue eyes, not contacts, soft features, and strange scar-like streaks on his face. As it turned out, he also had scars on his neck, but they were hidden by the collars of his shirts and other clothes. She was intrigued by him. Sakura knew her worth. She knew how to take care of herself, and rightfully thought she looked great. A beautiful face, carefully defined green eyes, and her signature pink hair, which she'd used a lot of dye on. Her roots were slowly changing color, but she doubted they'd ever turn this unnatural shade. Despite the dye, Sakura's hair was in excellent condition. Reaching her shoulder blades, It looked vibrant and beautiful. No wonder Haruno uses so many hair masks, takes vitamins, and does other beauty tricks. Her favorite cherry shampoo, cherry mask, and cherry hair conditioner, all of these saved her dye-damaged hair. Following the rules at the academy, Sakura wore her hair in a ponytail or a braid, sometimes a double braid. She only lightly accentuated her lips with gloss, preferring her natural beauty. The first teacher I met during class asked me to introduce myself and tell about myself. Sakura, as the class representative, volunteered first. Looking at the blonde man, who gave her an indifferent look, Haruno said cheerfully, "Hello everyone! I'm Sakura Haruno, and I'm the class representative. I've always wanted to be a doctor, and I hope this dream of mine comes true. I really hope you get excellent grades this year, and I also hope you pass our first exam session with flying colors. I don't know what to tell you about myself, since we're meeting for the first time. Well, I love animals, and I'm also a perfectionist. I love helping people, so you can always turn to me. Now, let me choose the next person I'm going to meet." Sakura put her finger to her lips, and then pointed it at Naruto. "This young man." Naruto shrugged, walking down to the principal's podium, and Sakura took her seat at the front of the room. She always sat there, but the seat next to her was empty. There weren't many such brave souls at the university. Maybe they'll show up later, when they've gained courage. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he said, shrugging indifferently. "I don't see any need to tell you anything about myself, as I don't intend to go beyond the bounds of formal relations with you, and I don't enjoy the company of people outside of places where I'm forced to be. I wouldn't advise pestering me with unnecessary questions, but if something really puzzles you, feel free to ask. Maybe I can help. I'm damn smart, you know," he snorted, glaring at the class president. "Nasty girl." But Sakura didn't give up her position. She sat down at the back desks next to Naruto and said to him with a smile, "Hi, how are you?" "I don't see the need to answer. You're not interested anyway." Naruto shrugged, not even looking at Haruno. "Okay, I take it you don't like to drag things out." Sakura changed her tone, causing the blonde to turn to her with a raised eyebrow, though his eyes didn't show even a hint of interest. She'd long since noticed that this guy was completely emotionless. "I'll tell you straight. I like you, so let's go out." Naruto studied her face for a long moment, searching for signs of a stupid joke. Dating a guy she didn't even know? Someone who could just rape her in a dark corner and forget about her? Dating someone who made it clear he didn't want to communicate? "What about the bed?" he asked, looking into Sakura's silly eyes when she heard such a question. "Well, not right away, but later it will be possible, I guess." Naruto burst out laughing, unable to contain himself. My God, how did this idiot get into the academy? How did this idiot get into his year, into his group? How did this idiot plan to become, as she'd previously declared, his partner, along with a silent sigh, who pleased Naruto by not bothering him too much, and who, besides, was a work relationship, forming Team 7. "You're such a SK," Naruto drawled. Sakura was offended, but he didn't care. He had no intention of tolerating someone who offered herself. However, the girl didn't repeat her mistakes again, and he wouldn't have paid any attention to her anyway. She had disappointed him. It was approaching 6 o'clock, and Naruto wanted to get some rest before his first day of school. A stroll around the city had cleared the air quite nicely, despite the memories of his life, which weren't always pleasant. At least now his neighbor would be alive, although he certainly wasn't worried about him. He just had no desire to go to jail because of him. When Uzumaki entered their room, Sasuke was talking on his cell phone. His expression was irritated, clearly arguing with someone. Pretending to be disinterested, Naruto plopped down on the bed, untying his sneakers. "Itachi, I told you, if he's that bad again, take him to the hospital. They won't make it public. He's a great specialist." Listening to the answer, the Uchiha rolled his eyes. "Aniki, You know better than me what happens when he drinks nonstop for several days. I can't help you with transport. I have classes tomorrow. I need to rest. Sasuke was silent for a moment, obviously listening to his interlocutor, and then barked angrily. Go fuck yourself, Itachi. After hanging up, Sasuke noticed his neighbor had already returned. A sly smile blossomed on his lips, and Naruto asked venomously, Problems? It's okay, Sasuke said dryly. You're lying. Naruto nodded to himself. He had learned to recognize lies a long time ago. Why would I lie? Sasuke raised his eyebrows. Everyone lies. Naruto shrugged, as if it were an obvious fact. The Uchiha snorted. Have you seen enough of Dr. House? Maybe I should prescribe Vicodin? Naruto readily pulled a stack of documents from under the bed, which could easily be used to obtain the medicine. All he needed to do was sign them, as they were all sealed. What purpose did they serve, Uzumaki? And also, Wilson, I want a couple of pretty ladies in my bed, the guy said, noticing the look on him. Sasuke choked and then hurried off to take a shower. Was his neighbor really crazy, or was he just pretending to be? Chapter 5 He pressed the syringe plunger and held his breath. Feeling the divine liquid, which shone silver in his eyes, travel through his body. Quickly carried by the bloodstream, it brought oblivion, allowing him to relax and escape the tedious problems of everyday life. He was so tired of living in his own body. It wasn't even exactly his body. He was simply fed up with his own soul. He wanted to get rid of it, so it wouldn't hurt so much, and take another one. One that was rotten, no longer sensitive to pain. Not so tender. Souls, like his, were the most sensitive to pain. He thought about this now, relaxed, stretched out on the couch, and lighting a cigarette. Sometimes it was unbearable to endure this pain, so he had to resort to the help of certain external factors. There was one guy in their group, a typical drug dealer. Everyone turned to him, wanting to be happy for a couple of hours. People would especially line up to see him after classes at the morgue. He wasn't pained by the sight of dead people. Rather, he was tormented by the memories. He wanted to banish them from his consciousness, wanted to rip his own soul from. And where, exactly, was it? If, of course, it was there. Many believed it was near the heart, in the chest. But he thought it could be in the heel, or in the eye, or even, God forgive me, in the ass. At least, for some, it definitely got lost there. Sometimes, on the contrary, he thought the soul was gone. And it didn't matter that the body of the dead or deceased weighed a few grams less. Naruto rested his head on his hand, not really listening to Kabuto. The damn sadist was going on about some cruel nonsense again. Apparently, about how he'd done an internship and experimented on animals. He jabbed syringes into eyes and performed amateur lobotomies on mice. In his first years, he'd often get a pencil in the forehead for such stories, and complaints would immediately follow to the dean. But the dean's office shrugged. There were no candidates, so he had to put up with Yakushi. Passing his exams was difficult. You had to choose not what a doctor would do. You had to choose what he wouldn't do. It felt like Kabuto was insane. Sometimes he'd fail several groups of first-year students who didn't yet understand how to deal with this jerk. By the end of your studies, you'd get used to ignoring his chatter. Many of the Uzumaki group had been bringing books to Kabuto's lectures for a long time now. Most just listened to music or watched movies. You could even sit in the front row in front of that idiot with his huge computer and turn the volume up full blast, and he'd just give up and continue his amazing stories. Sighing, the blonde glanced sadly at his watch. This was his last class, so some had long since gone home, but his reputation couldn't be tarnished by skipping classes. They'd definitely forgive him a few without detention. He'd learned that last year when he'd missed classes due to certain circumstances. But this year, he'd only be missing classes due to illness. And since Naruto rarely got sick, he'd likely have no absences. However, the young man had studied almost everything they were told to do himself. It was unlikely he could have passed his final exams right now, of course, but part of his thesis was already completed, even though the topic wasn't all that new. He had used a variety of materials to write a paper on surgical options in cardiology, and he was required to attend each one to observe them firsthand and write about the pros and cons, based on theory rather than practice. There were still a few more surgeries to perform, but he would definitely be given the green light as soon as such patients appeared. For this doctor, most of them were just expendable material, visual examples. Naturally, his classmates didn't understand this either. When Naruto checked his watch again, it turned out that class had ended 5 minutes ago. Calmly rising and ignoring the quasi-professor's chatter, he threw his things into his backpack. Kabuto even paused, surprised by such impudence from the straight-A student. It was hardly surprising, however. This was his first time taking a long breath, and the other professors had already gotten used to this student leaving precisely at the end of class. Or more precisely, no later than 5 minutes after his long breath. He didn't say anything, didn't explain, simply saying goodbye and leaving. Many students were shocked by this behavior, but Uzumaki calmly explained that he had everything meticulously planned. Either he had to be on time for the next class, or he had classes scheduled, or he was simply smoking by the clock. In short, nothing and no one was to disrupt his precious plans. Naruto-kun, colleague, where are you going? I'm not your colleague, the guy replied coldly, then added, I'm going home. Class ended 5 minutes ago, and anything you say now is overtime, and I'm not interested. You can say that to anyone who's willing to listen about your wonderful experiments with rats. I still have plans. I have work to do. Goodbye. Naruto-kun. Kabuto wasn't about to let the insolent fellow go so easily. You need to be polite and listen to what I have to say. After all, I never let anyone go, and a teacher has the right to detain his students. They only leave with his permission. A teacher's bell. That's what you'll say at school. But here we have strictly defined class times, beyond which I'm not required to sit. Don't forget to tell me you'll mark me off. But that won't work. The thing is, our class monitor marks attendance with a check mark. And if you mark me with an N in your log, your information will be inconsistent with hers. And all my colleagues, Naruto glanced around the class, will confirm that I was here. Otherwise, a few secrets I know about you will easily leak out, and into the hands of those for whom they were intended. Naruto was bluffing. He didn't know anything dangerous, but he could easily find out. His classmates' faces fell, and they nodded frantically, as if to say they'd confirm anything they were ordered to confirm. The only one who wasn't scared was Hinata, a girl who was more of a mystery to Naruto than an open book. She was always a quiet mouse, silent and unconcerned. She seemed to have never approached him, but he caught her staring at him, cold and calm, without a spark of interest. Did she even talk to anyone from this group? Or even outside the academy? Naruto seemed to have seen her interacting with the professors a couple of times, and even answering questions at the board. Her voice was thoughtless, lifeless, and indifferent. Somehow dull. Naruto suddenly realized he'd never heard this girl laugh. Okay, Naruto-kun, I understand you, Kabuto said in an icy voice, adjusting his glasses. That's great. Naruto smiled and left the classroom, noticing as he left that Yakushi had dismissed all the students. Someone gave him an approving pat on the shoulder, presumably for saving them, and Naruto didn't snap back. He had an important meeting today, so he was in high spirits. Sasuke was tired. No, he knew this academy would be a bit more challenging than his previous school, but here they were just scribbling out lectures non-stop. He'd already made a few friends, though. Kiba Inuzuka and Choji Akimichi had joined him. The former was clearly a dog person. Fawn tattoos adorned his cheeks, and a necklace with a dog fawn around his neck. Kiba later explained it was a prop. He also smelled like dog food. Turns out, the idiot carried it in his bag. The second one clearly loved to eat, judging by his figure, or rather, lack thereof. Oddly enough, this guy had tattoos on his cheeks in the shape of, well, spirals, or something, symbolizing his love of butterflies. Sasuke couldn't help but grin, imagining this chubby man soaring through the clouds on butterfly wings in search of chips, lemonade, and a huge pizza. The Uchiha had a snack with his new acquaintances at the cafe, and Choji ate more than he and Kiba combined. Hungry students eat a lot after class, so the Akimichi's consumption was immeasurable. Kiba whispered in Sasuke's ear that Choji liked to joke, but hated it when people made fun of his figure, his love of food, and so on. It was good he'd warned him, because Sasuke wanted to ask how he managed to fit so much in. The boy returned home not too late, but it was already getting dark. About 8 o'clock, I suppose. His roommate should already be in his room, which was a little disappointing. Sasuke wanted to spend time in silence, without any sarcasm. He was right. Naruto was in the room. When the Uchiha quietly closed the door behind him, hoping his neighbor sitting by the window wouldn't notice, Naruto turned sharply to face him, staring with gleaming eyes and terrifyingly dilated pupils. Naruto? Sasuke said hesitantly. Is he stoned? Ha. Sasuke-chan, Uzumaki said nasal-voiced, handing his neighbor a wooden board with a few white lines. Want to sniff some together? Quality product, heh. It'd be a shame if it went to waste. I can't just anymore. Sasuke backed away. Naruto watched with a smirk, and the Uchiha's gaze slid lower, studying the effect the drug had on his neighbor. Reaching the most important spot, Sasuke noticed Naruto's pants were bulging in a characteristic way. Damn it. Chapter 6 Naruto didn't seem at all embarrassed by his awkward position. He placed the board on the table, but continued to stare at his roommate. Everything before his eyes was clouded with a pleasant haze. He felt a little out of his mind, and it seemed all boundaries between this Uchiha and Naruto himself had been erased. Sasuke sat down carefully on his bed, trying to press himself against the wall. Naruto knew perfectly well why he was so scared, but he could easily control himself. This wasn't his first experience, and his reaction was typical. Besides, Sasuke was a guy, not a girl, and Naruto would never stoop so low as to touch him. And it wasn't that Sasuke was Sasuke. Sasuke just had a dick in his pants, too. Do you know why I hate you? The blonde suddenly asked hoarsely. Sasuke winced and raised his eyebrows. He wasn't really interested, but the statement was still provocative. It's because you're not like all those scum. He waved his hand vaguely towards the door. They're all the same gray, and you're somehow different. I hate you because I want to chat with you, like right now. He thoughtfully ran his hand through his hair, ruffling it. But I don't need people, those freaks. I hate people. Obviously. All of them. The word sounded terribly cold, even making goosebumps run down the Uchiha's skin. And I can't hate you like them. This hatred is somehow different. Sighing, Naruto opened the window and lit a cigarette, quietly striking the lighter. Sasuke sat, slowly processing what he'd just heard. Naruto had said he kind of hated him, but not that kind of hatred. What did that even mean? And should he even be happy that Naruto didn't hate him? Or wait, he did, but not that kind of hatred. You'd get confused with this guy. Okay. Naruto distracted him from his thoughts. I'll go take a shower. Sasuke just nodded silently, not understanding why Naruto was even reporting to him. Before, they'd showered, not spoken, and there hadn't really been any problems. But now, Naruto's words sounded as if they'd been friends for a long time. And, oddly enough, Sasuke was somehow quite happy with this prospect. He was never particularly well-liked. He'd always been something of an outcast, though he gravitated toward people like crazy. And today, when he went out to play on the playground, all the children ran away as if the new arrival were, at the very least, very sick and contagious. He approached a girl playing with a ball alone. It was the first time he'd seen her here, so perhaps he'd be able to communicate normally with her. "Hello," he said cautiously. The girl looked up at him. "Let's be friends." She smiled at him, genuinely and unlike all the other children. He saw it, the words, "Come on," were almost on her lips, and he felt joy slowly envelop his heart, bestowing a long-for light, when suddenly, "Hey!" came a voice from behind them. The girl looked fearfully at the boy, who was a couple of years older. "Are you stupid? Don't be friends with him. He's crazy." They grabbed her by the arm, and she tried to break free, saying something about not wanting to obey, that she could be friends with whomever she wanted. However, the boy was stronger than her. And the last thing the crazy one saw were tears on the cheeks of his almost friend. She tried to approach him after that, saying she wanted to stay, but he wouldn't listen. He hated her when she couldn't escape his clutches. He concluded that if she'd wanted to communicate, she would have escaped by any means necessary. The morning was rough. Naruto sat up in bed with difficulty and instinctively glanced at the other side of the room. His neighbor's bed was neatly made, and his bags were nowhere to be seen. He must have already run off to class. Luckily, the blonde's own class didn't start for another hour and a half. However, he needed to have time to wake up and get himself at least somewhat organized. He sighed and rubbed his head. It hurt like crazy. The irritated mucous membranes in his nose were also bothering him. He spotted a glass of water and a couple of aspirin on the nightstand next to his bed. They were unlikely to help.